Yeah, just want to make sure, just do a quick check with Heather that you can hear and see me still. It's pretty important. Give me a thumbs up or say something.
I can hear you, Paul. Good
Great.
morning, everyone. This is Heather.
Good morning. Okay, so welcome to the 2022 SDCI Home Fairs. We're going to be talking about tree regulations as they pertain to private property. We will briefly mention the right-of-way too, but the focus of this presentation is for residents of Seattle who have questions about trees on their property or neighboring properties. And we will touch on some of the enforcement. That's the enforcement is taken care of by our housing and zoning group. So we work closely with them and with those types of issues. So I have some knowledge of that, which is helpful. And of course, things aren't moving for me now. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. So today is going to be me and Heather, and then tomorrow Deborah's going to be chatting too. We have an identical session tomorrow. So again, remember to remain muted. Type your questions into the chat box, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Apologize for the slow start here. So the objectives of this presentation is to explain tree regulations on private property, to inform you folks as residents of the city. We won't be doing an in-depth discussion of citywide tree policy, but there's plenty of opportunity to contact us after the presentation through email or through our Q&A portal, and this presentation and all the links will be available in the coming weeks once it's updated by Moon. Okay. So trees in Seattle are valued and are protected in a variety of ways. The main parts of the code that we look to are 2511, which is the tree protection code, and 2509, which is the code that regulates critical areas. These codes vary based on the location, and we sort of lump these locations into three different categories. We have undeveloped land and undeveloped parcels. Trees over 6 inches cannot be removed. This is to try and save tree canopy before development begins. So that's reviewed through the development process. Trees can be removed from undeveloped land through a hazard tree assessment from a certified arborist or a registered consulting arborist. But you do need to apply, if you have undeveloped property, you do need to apply for an approval either through a hazard tree application or a building permit. building or grading permit. So tree removal on developed land is limited on single-family, low-rise, mid-rise, and commercial zones. And unless trees are found to be hazardous or a tree removal is proposed as part of development, no exceptional trees may be removed. You can remove up to 3 non-exceptional trees per year, and that's per year period. And then tree removal in ECAs is regulated, and the ECAs that environmentally critical areas include steep slopes, shoreline areas. Typically, shoreline areas, it's a 200-foot buffer. Wetlands, wetland buffers, and potential slide areas trees are all regulated over 6 inches in those areas. So when looking at whether you need approval to remove a tree, there's some things you need to take into account. Normally pruning isn't regulated on private property, but I'll get to that. But the zoning of your property can affect that question if your property has an environmentally critical area, and we'll include a map to be able to find those. And if you're building an addition or new construction and that there's trees that overhang that area. And basically any trees over 6 inches in diameter are regulated. Trees in the public right-of-way are regulated by SDOT, urban forestry, and pruning and removal of right-of-way trees does require a permit. It's a free permit through SDOT, and I've included links to that at the end of this presentation. I'm just going to put my chat feature on because I don't see that here. Excuse me. Sure, I'm keeping up with folks. So the main categories of trees on which our regulations focus are trees over 6 inches in diameter, and that's measured at standard height, diameter at standard height. Exceptional trees that have significant value due to their size and species, and these are defined under Directors Rule 16, 2008. And we'll be briefly chatting about that Directors Rule, and we'll include a link to that. And hazardous trees that pose a high risk of damage to persons or property. Those are some of we normally work on those hazard tree applications as well. Okay. So environmentally critical areas, and these are areas that include wetlands, which protect water quality, fish habitat, wildlife habitat. ECA regulations protect these areas and protect public safety, but there's still development still allowed in these areas. And removing tree and vegetation in ECAs is allowed in limited circumstances, such as normal and routine maintenance. So sort of deadwooding, crown raising of trees for existing structures and areas in your yard as part of a issued building or grading permit, and for mitigation when we allow removal of a hazard tree in these areas. So trees can be removed in these areas, but the regulations are much tougher than the non-ECA areas, and Heather works on those revegetation plans. So exceptional trees, they're basically designated as a heritage tree, that can define it as an exceptional tree. And the heritage tree program, that's a collaboration by a group called Plant Amnesty, and SDOT helps with that. I used to work on that program, and that recognizes exceptional trees in private property and in the right of way. So, and SDOT maintains a current inventory. So, and they have a heritage tree layer where you can find those. But usually by their size, the exceptional trees, the heritage trees are going to be considered exceptional by SDCI. So, like I said, Directors Rule 16, 2008 is the go-to document. And essentially on table 1 of that rule, it gives the common species that we run into, natives and non-natives alike. And it gives size thresholds. But also, if they're not included on that table, then we look to this book, which is Trees of Seattle, which is Arthur Lee Jacobson went around and documented significant large trees. And so we look to that book as a reference currently. It's quite complicated. So I definitely recommend talking to an arborist, or again, taking photos and send them in to us. And we'll help you navigate that, because it can be pretty confusing. Even to some arborists I know that have worked in the industry a long time, they'll still contact me and ask me, especially if they run into a tree that's not common. So basically, we need the diameter of the tree at 54 inches or 4.5 feet above the ground. We need the scientific names of the genus and species. And then sometimes the heritage tree map's helpful too, because that'll give us that information. So hazard trees, either exceptional or over 6 inches in the ECA. Essentially what we're looking for there is that there's a structural defect and or disease, that there's actually a target present. Sometimes in ECAs there are no targets, so we want to leave even high risk trees in those areas can be good for down woody debris and wildlife and the like. Tip 331B is a really helpful resource for the hazard tree process. It talks about the submittal requirements. One common thing that we're running into in Seattle now, of course, is trees that are maybe not planted in the most ideal location. So it's, pretty commonly large true cedars or Douglas firs close to houses. So we do allow removal of trees where there's documented damage to infrastructure or buildings. Normally the infrastructure damage, we're looking to see if the tree can be retained in place with sort of air excavation techniques. So we will require that. So, and then there is allowances for emergency tree removals, and tip 331B outlines this. And essentially an emergency removal is one where there isn't time to go through the permitting process, because that can take a couple weeks, sometimes up to a month, depending if we have the documents that we need. So the emergency tree removal is definitely one that I encourage folks to work with your arborist to really fully document these conditions with clear photos that show the problems with the tree and why it's imminent. So I'd say most emergencies are where the tree fails, and then occasionally what's remaining could be considered imminent. So there are allowances to come in after the fact, but definitely encourage you to reach out on those ones if you have time and chat with us on those. We're more than happy to help answer questions, and in some of those cases we can waive some of the documents if it's just a real obvious situation. Same for dead trees too, that we do we still do require a permit application if they're considered exceptional size. So again, trees in the ECAs, a permit and approval is required for trees over 6 inches in these areas. And the tree removal is allowed through the building and grading permits and reviewed through a tree review. So we ask that you hire a qualified professional working on plans for ECAs and for the hazard tree approvals. And this is an expert who has the appropriate combination of certifications, education, training, and experience for a tree risk applications, for hazard tree applications. The minimum qualification is going to be the ISA track qualification, which is a tree risk assessment qualification. And this is every 5 years, folks have to go and receive a day of current training, and it's pretty valuable. I've been through it twice now, and it's a valuable certification and teaches you to look at the targets and sort of whether the tree indeed meets that high risk requirement to be removed. So removing trees that are not within these ECA areas, STCI approval is required if the trees are exceptional or if you need to remove more than 3 in a year period, or if a lot is developed. So the 3 trees a year, I recently ran into a situation with that where the trees weren't regulated, but this property had the bronze birch borer, which is killing our birch populations. So in that kind of situation, they needed to remove 10 quite small trees. So that's where we actually use the hazard tree approval process. So technically, sometimes trees might not meet that high risk, but they obviously, you don't want someone to have dying trees falling onto the deck in the house. So street trees again are regulated by SDOT for removing, pruning, and planting trees, and it's pretty important to talk to SDOT. That our rights of ways are quite busy now with utilities and plans for new sidewalks and the like. So definitely reach out to them. They have a phone number and email of them the website listed below. Again, we'll include links to that. So tree pruning is essentially the crown thinning, crown cleaning, windowing, crown raising. And this does not include topping, which is a popular thing that folks like to do, especially in view areas. I understand that. But topping, generally speaking, is going to damage the structure of the tree, likely kill the tree, weaken the roots of the tree, and lead to more erosion in the long run. So it's definitely not a standard that's allowed, and the ECA code specifically says no topping is allowed. So that's a common violation. Is especially view areas that have been maintained in the past. If the cuts are topping cuts, then that's not allowed. So there are options to restructure trees. So definitely talk to your arborist about that. So trees in environmentally critical areas, pruning is allowed if it's standard routine maintenance pruning. And this pruning should meet the ANSI A300 standards. And I definitely recommend talking to a ISA certified arborist. And maybe even a consulting arborist too is a good idea. Sometimes it's good to get a kind of independent opinion, separate of a tree company even. So, and then SDOT trees outside of ECAs, they're regulated by 1539, the municipal code. You can apply through the website, or you can call, I believe this is an answer service, the 684-8733 number. So private trees are outside of environmentally critical areas. There is no approval required through our department. I still definitely recommend talking to an ISA certified arborist. Topping is, by definition, in 2511 is essentially removal of the tree. So even though the whole tree is not removed to the ground, the code considers that type of damage removal. Same for damaging roots as well, large roots. Okay, so planting trees, this is my favorite piece of the puzzle. Street trees, SDOT permit is required. So you need to talk to SDOT and have a issued urban forestry permit from them for planting. They'll help you figure out the best place and the spacing from existing trees. Some trees are not allowed to be planted in the right-of-way per 1539, such as fruit trees, big leaf maples, cottonwoods, Lombardy poplars. They're prohibited just because of the issues that SDOT faces with those species. I think it's a little bit of a shame with the fruit trees, but I understand that that's from a litigation standpoint, especially someone like a big old apple tree that's not being maintained, dropping its fruit becomes a bit of a tripping hazard. So it'd be good if we could plant fruit trees, but we're not allowed to. So planting on your own private property, there's no requirement for you to get approval from SDCI. I mean, definitely speak with your arborist about spacing. That's a common issue. People planting trees too close or over utilities next to their house, and then the tree becomes exceptional, and then it's regulated. So yeah, just be mindful of the mature size of the tree when you're planting. There's a great program that SPU puts on, which is the Trees for Neighborhoods program. That's something I've done and gotten trees for my yard, and I was involved with that when I worked for SDOT. Just an amazing resource there for planting, pruning, and you can sign up and they do a tree giveaway every July, I believe it is. So that's a great program. Give them a plug for sure. So now into the sort of less fun part of the tree regulations, legal cuttings, which as arborist reviewers, we work as consultants with our housing and zoning group, and they're the ones we basically operate on a complaint-based system, which has its challenges. So in parks, we often run into problems with people illegally going into parks to improve views that maybe they've had for years, but there's park trees. Just definitely know where the boundaries are of your property, because trees can have been topped before, and then the tree service thinks it's fine to come in again. But our housing and zoning folks are getting pretty good at following up. They're pretty fast to follow up on these illegal cuttings. Again, with the right-of-way, any tree service in the right-of-way, if they're making large pruning cuts on a tree over 2 inches, or they're removing a tree, they should be able to produce a permit and show you that. So I don't see a problem in asking people. If you see them removing a tree, ask them if they have a permit. And tree topping is prohibited on all rights of way, and this includes an open rights of way, and those are not always clear. So definitely do your research. So private property, like I said before, you can't remove exceptional trees unless it's been designated as high risk. You need to get that hazard tree assessment from a certified arborist or registered consulting arborist with that ISA tree risk qualification. Then you must apply or have approval from us prior to the tree coming out. And the only caveat to that would be the imminent risk trees and emergency removal where, the tree's falling over. So ECAs, removing, clearing any detrimental action that affects habitat vegetation is prohibited. That's regulated. Again, I think I touched on this, but steep slopes, slide areas, known slide areas, wetlands, wetland buffers, riparian corridors, shoreline habitat and shoreline habitat buffers. And that shoreline buffer is normally 200 feet from the shore. So it's can be pretty substantial. So trees over 6 inches in those areas, I would normally go through a shoreline exemption process. And that's reviewed by our shoreline reviewer with input from us. General tree maintenance is allowed without approvals in these areas, as long as it meets acceptable standards and isn't tree topping. So I think I said this before that, tree companies working on regulated trees in these ECAs should have an approval from the city, especially if they're doing something, and if they're doing something that appears to be topping, then that likely was not approved. So the shoreline district, like I said again, it needs to be through an exemption, and this is usually through a building permit process, but the exemption process does capture high-risk trees as well. They found the regulations for the shoreline are yet another section of code, which is 2360. Like I said before, this is usually 200 feet from larger bodies of water, so Lake Washington, Lake Union, the Sound. Sorry about that. The restriction on these areas is the same as most other ECAs. And the tree protection code does still apply in the shoreline, and 2509 does supersede 2511 and steep slopes in these areas, and if you have a tree and vegetation plan as part of a building permit, but we still do apply it for retaining trees and tree protection. So sorry if I feel like I rushed through it a little bit, but so I've included there's 2 pages here of more information. So these are all pretty easy to find links, but I've got them here. So our website, links to all the different tips, link to the tree protection sign if you're doing some development and protecting a tree, our Q&A portal, and I definitely encourage folks, if we don't get to your answers today, this is a good way to get us a question. Heather and I will be working on those this coming week, so don't be shy to use that. And we do have a new chat function on that page, which is in its teething stages, so bear with us with that because there's only 2 of us that are manning that from the tree group. So I encourage you to use the Q&A portal at this time, but if you need a more a faster answer, the instant chat can get to us. So just some of the links here to like Parks and Recreation, the Trees for Seattle program. Plant Amnesty is a great resource if you need a referral to a private arborist. This is the link I'll send to folks because we're not allowed to. City policy doesn't allow us to recommend a an individual tree service. Um, Great Plant Picks is an amazing website of sort of vetted shrubs, flowers, trees that do well in the Pacific Northwest. Then another helpful site there is the verifying an ISA credential, and that's definitely important with a tree risk assessor qualification because people let that lapse, and we do require them to be up to date on that credential for us to accept a report in that ISA form as a tree removal. Okay, again, here's here's a link to all of our email addresses. Again, Deb's going to be leading the chat tomorrow. The same presentation for about the same time, 10 to noon. So, if you know someone who didn't come along today or you want to go along tomorrow, Heather's going to be helping then. Again, I appreciate that, Heather. There was popular demand from last year, so we're doing two sessions this year instead of just one. So I'm going to head back to the title screen here and then just open it up for discussion. We've got plenty of time. Still got an hour and a half. So one thing I just want to sort of run through is, just some sort of housekeeping for the chat and the discussion and the Q&A, just to want folks to keep it positive, keep it positive. We like to hear your opinions, of course. Keep it positive and hopefully relevant to tree regulations. I can definitely help try and answer the enforcement questions, but just be mindful that's not my specialty. I know a lot about it. Keep it respectful. Remember that we're here to answer questions. We're here for you for a resource. Just want to keep it just respectful and be respectful of other people's time as well. And if we need to carry on those conversations after the fact, I can be available in the week by phone. If folks are, because we're passionate about trees. I mean, I love trees. That's why I do this job. So I'm going to let Heather kind of go through the chat and
Okay.
encourage folks to speak up, turn your camera on. It's weird speaking to my blank computer screen. I can much rather do this in person. So
Okay, so I've kind of listed, good morning, everyone. This is Heather. I've got a list of people that have been asking questions in order, so I thought I would just call. If you're feeling comfortable asking a question, just turn on your camera and unmute yourself, and then when you're done with a question and you feel like it's been answered, then just turn your video off and we'll move to the next question. So the first ones, we've got two from Barry. Barry, if you want to turn on your video, if you're comfortable asking your two questions, I'll go ahead and just read the two that he had put out there, and then if you'd like to come on, that'd be great.
If folks don't want to go on camera, that's fine too. There's no requirement for that. You just go on mic.
I think hello everyone. Barry was interested in the margins. He understands that the rules are there for everybody to read. He wants to know more about exceptional trees in areas clients want to build in and how to work around them. And then also there's no mention of rules about neighboring trees that have drip lines that hang over an area of construction. The rules only seem to pertain to trees on property being built, and he would like to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, hi Barry, can you hear me? I don't hear you. You might need. Can you? Yeah, I don't hear you. I can try and answer the question though. I don't. I sent you an unmute request, so you should be able. There you go.
Okay, thanks.
Hey Barry, good question. This is it's a pretty common question that we run into a lot with development and trees that overhang properties. So the code actually really doesn't give us any clear direction on this, but what we do is we regulate those trees based on if they are considered exceptional. And 2511.050 that outlines the tree protection area, which is to the drip line of the tree,
Mm-hmm.
with allowances for a reduction in the outer root zone, which is half of that radius.
Mm-hmm.
And the limits to the disturbance in the outer area are 1/3 of the whole of the tree protection area, which is the whole
Mm-hmm.
the canopy as a whole. So, and this is obviously a pretty contentious thing when, especially in upzoned areas that were single family going to LR zones where we
Mm-hmm.
have large trees overhanging, and so it's a balance and it's tricky. Yeah. So remind me what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the legally, the way that the law is written, I mean, we look at regulation as law, really. It doesn't mention, if you look at if and but statements and whatnot. I was really surprised, and I actually haven't had an issue with it yet, but I was just
Yeah.
thinking, well, this is kind of weird that it's not written, it's only written about the trees on that property. And there
Yeah.
looks like no legal regulation for any trees that are on a neighboring property that are affected by the construction on that, the property. So, I never know where the city stands on, do you exceed your written rules and laws by just having an opinion about that? Or, is this something that is going to be written? It probably should be. Well, I'm telling you, it should be written into the law properly because it's a gray area right now.
Yeah, it
And
is.
otherwise, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And,
agree. Yeah. Go on.
uh,
Sorry.
and then, yeah, I think the biggest issue that I run into, because I do a lot of permitting for small projects, just small
Yeah.
additions and whatnot, is that
Yeah.
we often want to put a foundation within that drip line. And, we always have the arborist come out. And of course, the cost of doing FAR calculations and the cost of doing tree regulation, forget
Yeah.
about affordable housing in Seattle.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they just added so much in the last couple of years that takes a lot of time and money to deal with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
of course, these are people who have private property. They want to expand onto their little house because they're having kids, and then they're told, oh no, you can't expand, because there's trees in the way. So how do we work around? Is there a way, if there is an exceptional tree and if it's not hazardous,
Yeah.
how do, like, is there a way to say, hey, these people deserve to be able to add on to their house and their private property, but they
Yeah.
have to plant more trees? And that doesn't seem to be clear to me as how we can, alter this so that everybody's happy. Is there?
So there is sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, no, no. I appreciate it.
So there is, I mean, 2511.060 gives options, based on the allowed lot coverage.
Right.
Of course, that was tricky if a tree is overhanging from a neighboring property, because you're not going to be able to remove a tree from a neighboring property. But what I would say is, the purpose of the tree protection code is to allow flexibility of design, and we take into account existing disturbance particularly. So, and that can be an existing house foundation. It can also be an existing, say, retaining wall,
Mhm.
sometimes a patio, depending on how it's constructed. So we holistically look at the site, and look what those existing disturbances are, and then so if there's and those don't account against you if you're developing that property. So I feel, although the code doesn't give us a lot of clear language, there is, in conversation with reviewers, but even before a project begins,
Mm.
we can help coach you and talk to your arborist and come up with ways of making it fit the code but still allow that development. So, and I think that is, like, you talk about the code not addressing those trees, like, what comes to my mind is be careful what we wish for,
Yeah.
because often updates and changes to codes we think can be improve what we have now, And that can clearly be the case, but I think it can actually, it could easily flip against us and
Yeah.
and work the other way, with case law and the like. So
Right.
so yeah,
Well, I guess my biggest question, and the one I would really like to, hear is if let's put it to the extreme. There's a giant exceptional tree right where they want to build an addition. And
Yeah.
they have an 800 square foot house, but they got an 8,000 foot property and, it makes sense to build there. Is there a way around that? Because I don't see it in the rules. So you're saying it's not there, but we should consult with you?
I would say it's very site and tree specific, but
Yeah.
technically you have the allowances in 2511-060 with I think at 35%, you're allowed to cover the lot by 35%.
Right.
So that gives you, a few options in that piece for single family. That's for single family. So
Right.
working through those options in there. And if you still can't get to where you want to be, then definitely consult. But yeah, there's not much flexibility in the code. It's sort of,
So the one where you work around the tree, and oftentimes these tree drip lines are, take up most of the yard where you're allowed to
yeah,
build, right? So
yeah.
you're pretty much saying that we cannot take down an exceptional tree and replant other trees. There's no option in that case.
No, there's talk of an update to the code, which is, the code's being worked on right now with city council and with our policy group, and there is talk about a fee in lieu system for that. So yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
not at this point in time, there is none, but maybe in the future,
Yeah.
there could be. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
I think that would be a good tool.
they only need six diameter inches per 1,000 square feet or something like that, right? For
Yeah.
if you're building a new lot.
Right, for
And it
caliper
seems like
requirements. Yeah. Yeah.
caliper requirements, but we can't make that. There's no other way to make that up. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was reading there. I wasn't missing something, but thanks for
Okay.
your.
Yeah. And feel
for
free
that.
to,
Yeah.
if you have, if you want to carry on the conversation,
Yeah.
definitely feel free to reach out over email, and I can happy to give you a call and
Sure.
happy to look at stuff, with you and your arborist. So,
Yeah.
all righty.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Barry. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Thank you,
weekend.
Barry.
Thank you.
So the next question came from Mel Guy. If you're comfortable turning on your video and asking a question, I can go ahead and just read through it. It says, branches from a big tree in my elderly neighbor's backyard extend at least 10 feet across my roof, and it's creating a moss problem on my roof. My neighbor has limited resources and has not shown willingness to cooperate in correcting the problem. What do you prescribe as a best way to handle this persistent situation? Please advise.
Okay. Hey, Mel. I don't know if you're around. Did you unmute him? Okay.
I'm going to look. I sent a
Like,
request if you'd like to unmute or not. I'm not
if
sure.
you need to, if
Yeah.
you want to talk.
Yeah.
So essentially, this situation would be considered a civil matter between you and the neighbor. So SDCI wouldn't be involved in that, but it's a common issue, and the tree protection code doesn't speak to it currently. I know from working as a private arborist, this is something that you have the legal right to prune a tree that extends onto your property. I believe as long as the pruning that you're doing to the tree doesn't damage the long-term health and stability of the tree. So sort of building clearance pruning, if done by an ISA certified arborist to current industry standards, should not be damaging a tree. So I would encourage, of course, dialoguing with the neighbor and let them know, and it would be on you as when the branches sort of come over onto your property, that maintenance would fall to you, I'm afraid. So yeah, it's a civil matter, but definitely a commonly asked question, and it can be quite frustrating for folks. I understand that. So yeah, I don't know if you managed to unmute yourself, Mel, and you want to respond.
Yep. Mel, you can raise your hand if you want me to call on you. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. It was from Aki Tomita, and I actually put the answer in the chat, but just so you all know, they were wondering where they could get approval, permit application for hazardous trees in an ECA. And so I went ahead and put into the chat how to apply for a hazard tree removal.
Awesome.
So that's in the chat for you guys.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, no worries. The next question is from Catherine. If you feel comfortable turning your video on and asking, or just, talking with Paul. The question is for you, Paul. I have an exceptional tree that is encroaching on my roof overhang, and my arborist tells me that I have to cut out the overhang to make room for the tree, and that I must wait for it to encroach on the actual house structure before I can remove it. Is this correct?
I don't think so.
And I think that is this Catherine? No, I sent a request for you to unmute, Catherine, so you can unmute.
If you hover over your.
Yep.
Well, there you go. Hi, Catherine. How you doing?
There. Yeah, so it's a lovely tree that I've been maintaining for a while. It's a cypress. I've even have it cabled a couple of spots up above. But now one of the large portions of the trunk is encroaching on the house. And, it's one of those ones where the tree has got two major trunks. And the one major trunk is starting to encroach on the house. And my arborist was telling me when she was out here last time that I have to wait until the tree is actually damaging or going to damage the structure of the house and not just the roof overhang, that I would need to carve out part of the roof overhang to accommodate the tree while it grows. That didn't sound right to me, and so that's my question.
So this is sort of what I touched on earlier, was this, we're running into trees that were planted in the wrong location.
Right.
And I would say that if the tree trunk is getting close, unfortunately for me anyway, the building, in with the way our code is written and the way SDCI approaches things, your house sort of wins over the tree. So I would say if, you can see it's an inevitability, we're not going to make you keep the tree until it's damaging your house. I mean, I have seen people that have done cutouts on the house when they love trees, and they've had a builder come in and cut out some of the overhang. But I don't, I think we should have rights as private property owners to keep our houses intact, and so that would be a situation where feel free to send me some photos and I could give you probably a better answer. But I think, unfortunately, it's like when trees are planted that close, there's going to be a conflict, and we're not going to make you wait until that roof is being damaged.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah, I really love the tree, and it was planted before I moved into the house, and I've been caring for it because I like it a lot. But it is I can't move between the tree and the house, and now it's starting to get encroaching on that roof line, and so I just am concerned about. I don't really want to take it down, but I also don't want it to damage my home.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, and we can definitely look at that situation for you and advise you.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a pretty common thing, and it's easy to put a baby tree in and not think about that mature size.
Right.
So as through no fault of our own, right? We've all inherited, in most cases, large trees. So
yeah,
there's definitely room to remove it. So
okay. So in other words, if it gets to the point where the roof line is touching,
Yeah, within a few inches, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably about 2 inches right now,
Right.
from the roof line. Yeah.
Yeah, so, depending on the species, it's depending on how much diameter that tree is putting on. Say if it's not doing other damage to, say, the foundation, the basement, that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
then you may, you could keep it for a good few years. I mean, depending on the species, if it's a healthy Doug fir, for instance, it could be putting on a 1/4 inch, but something like a saguaro cypress is going to be going, much slower. But yeah, I mean, there are sometimes options to remove leads from trees too, but it sounds like your arborist has given you some advice on that. So,
Yeah, but you would be comfortable with me sending some photos?
oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're here for you. We're,
Okay.
we're, we're public servants. So, we're definitely here to,
Okay.
that
That'd be
would be,
great.
yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you.
Nice to talk, Catherine. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, next up, Laura Matter asked a question, and I put a couple answers in the chat. So Laura, feel free to hop on if you have any other questions related to. She was wanting me to share phone numbers and emails for who to call about reporting things like illegal cutting or other contentious issues. So
Okay.
I put a link in there, but actually I think the better way, and I put it in the chat, there is a phone number that you can call to log.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the best way. So
Yeah.
the phone number is 206-615-0808. Because then they get to you in the order that the calls are logged. So there's that.
Yeah.
Let's see, the next question.
One thing I'd just like
Yeah.
to add on that is, yeah, you've touched on it, is the phone call is a much better way to get in it. Often with tree removal, especially, time is of the essence. And that's where this complaint-based system can, it can be, often it's too late by the time the inspector gets there. So doing that phone call they're gonna route that to an inspector and sometimes actually get someone out there within the hour. So if that phone line's open and you speak to a real person, that's definitely the better way to report it. And I obviously don't encourage people to get into sticky situations with neighbors and tree services, but if you feel comfortable, ask if they have a permission, because we rely on the public's eyes out there to, because there's only a handful of us and lots of you. So yeah, anyway.
Thank you.
There's Laura.
One of the reasons I'm asking is that I
Hi, Laura.
oversee the Garden Hotline program, which is at Tilth Alliance, but it's a government-sponsored program through House
Okay.
and SPU, and we get these kinds of calls from the public saying, I see this going on.
Yeah.
Some of it also involves some of the things you're talking about with trees overgrowing, people's fences and, the neighbor contentiousness that can happen. So it's helpful to have a line, especially for those public spaces where we see people topping trees and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And one thing I'd encourage folks to is often in the heat of the moment, we get emotional, especially when trees are being damaged or removed. There's and pretty much all of our web pages, there's a way of checking to look and see if there's a permit. So I definitely encourage folks too to you have the technology at your fingertips to research addresses through our building and property record searches. So definitely look and see, because if there's an issued permission for them to remove the tree, that can save our inspection folks time, because our housing and zoning folks, the trees is just a piece of their daily job. So I'm definitely sensitive to, we don't want to send them on something that we've approved. So same with, I'm pretty sure you can. I'm not sure if SDOT's permits are as visible, but I can check into that. But yeah, great question, Laura. Thank you.
I've included a link to search your property records for any address. So you search by address, and it's in our Seattle Services portal that we call Acela.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Heather.
And then next up, let's see, Katie Peltonen. Is that how you pronounce it? I sent you a request to unmute if you'd like to ask your question. She was wondering what the stance is on non-native trees in ECA zones. If they are at risk of falling on a native tree and damaging it or bringing it down, can those be carefully removed?
That's an interesting question.
Hi. Yeah, this is
Hi.
Katie.
Hi,
Just
Katie.
curious. I live in a ECA zone up against Thornton Creek. So
Yeah.
curious to see like what I don't know all the regulations, which is why I'm like pretty interested in this meeting. But for a tree that's like leaning towards creek, pretty tall, in line with something that could be bringing another tree down, like what are the typical process for that?
So, so in ECAs, we would require the tree again to meet a high risk threshold, and that is based on targets, what we call targets under the tree, which are normally targets with where people are congregating, so your deck or your house or structures. And I've never come across someone wanting to remove a tree that's an invasive species that's threatening a native. So I actually can't answer that. It's a good question but that would be one that we can definitely talk to our ECA reviewer Christy about. Her and Heather work on re-veg. I don't know, Heather, if you have an answer to that one, but it would be something we could definitely look at for
You know,
sure.
there is opportunities for the community to do voluntary restoration projects. And I will put something in the chat for you about that. And then you could always reach out to me too later, or Christy, to talk more about that if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
I think it was like a few months ago when we had a lot of windstorms coming through, and there was like a poplar that had fallen over and damaged like some neighbors' trees, and then
Yeah,
was like probably like 5 feet from hitting their home.
yeah.
But in that type of situation, that was like kind of similar to what I'm asking. Like, I see something that basically could happen. Well, what are the preventative measures to make sure that doesn't happen?
Okay, yeah, I would that's where chatting to an ISA certified tree risk assessor that would be a good place to start. And if you don't have an arborist already, you could ask for a referral through Plant Amnesty. They're a great resource. There's definitely options to do, crown reduction of trees, and that's the national standards does allow that, and we do allow that kind of pruning to reduce end weight on trees. So there are pruning options available, but it is tree and site specific. So that's where with tree regulations, and because trees don't fit into a neat box, it's often just needs a bit of a conversation. But definitely talk to your arborist. I know poplar species in general are looked on with a little distaste, but they really do provide a great service to our forest because they're nitrogen fixers and they build the soil. They just grow fast and tend to fail. So yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. And also, I put a couple of links in there for Arborist and Plant Amnesty in the
Thanks,
chat,
Heather.
guys. And I may reach, if you want to, I don't know. Yeah, I would just suggest maybe reaching out to me and we can talk more about voluntary restoration if you'd like. Okay, so next up, Shirish Moharkar, the question was, and let me find you on the chat and see if you're still here. There you are. I sent you a request to unmute. Question is, do tree regulations apply to shrubs that grow quite large? For example, English laurels and Portuguese laurels. And there he is.
Hi there. So they can apply to, I would say they can apply to shrubs that are within ECAs because they can, large shrubs can definitely be providing sort of benefits to erosion of steep slopes, that kind of thing. But that's something that we look at through the director's rule and the Trees for Seattle book. But normally speaking, we're not going to overregulate, things that we consider to be shrubs. The one thing I would say about English laurel particularly is it is pretty invasive. So we tend to have, generally speaking, have a negative opinion of it. But the problems can come where, it can be a small tree or a grove in a way, a grove because it spreads. And then it's providing those benefits to the site, like, slowing of water and slowing of erosion of the slope. So I would say in a regular sort of single family setting with no ECAs, generally speaking, we're not going to regulate shrubs, and that's something that normally comes across our desk as part of a building permit. So we're going to be looking at that and sort of using that director's rule to make our decision. But yeah, so did you have a particular shrub and location that you had in mind?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, especially the Portuguese laurels tend to grow in groves and randomly. So, and some of these, and I am in the ECA zone, and they grow in random spots, I guess because of the root system.
Yeah.
So, that's why I was just wondering whether you can just take down ones that are, really eyesores. And they grow quite fast, and they have greater than 6-inch diameter, I think, within 10 years or 15 years. So I've got that kind of situation. Just wondering whether I can just take some of these random ones down that are kind of eyesores.
I would say if they're in the ECA and they're below 6 inches, then for sure you can take them down. But like you say, they tend to sprout, so that's an issue you'll run into. But if they're over 6 inches, then they're technically regulated. So a revegetation plan would be required for that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Heather and Christy, our ECA reviewers, work on those applications, like the voluntary restoration application, and that might be a kind of more appropriate avenue than say a hazard tree application, because it's fairly rare for those to be a risk, I would say. But so yeah, you would if you're removing significant canopy in those ECAs, then I would definitely recommend a conversation to with those reviewers to find out what you need to provide. But yeah, it's an issue, right? Because we often inherit these poor planting choices from previous owners. So
right, and sometimes they're not planting choices; they're just
birds. So yeah.
Grow every. While I've got you, one more question, if I might, and thank you, by the way, for this presentation. It's extremely helpful. Thank you, Heather and Paul.
Thank you.
One other question is regarding maples. They tend to, get pretty large pretty quickly. And again, this is an ECA zone. You had a slide earlier that talked about routine maintenance is okay, but of course, no topping. But so could you clarify what routine maintenance is on a maple that tends to get, quite large very quickly?
Okay, so routine maintenance would include removing large if there's large deadwood that's threatening areas of your property, large dead that hangs over kind of an area you sit, or any part of your yard that you're going to be in. Crown thinning, like to remove like diseased rubbing branches to increase airflow for tree health. In limited situations, crown reduction of, sometimes trees have what we call overextended branches that'll grow out past the edge of the canopy and maybe lead to structural problems down the line. So if you have an ISA arborist, who is reviewing your trees and looking at their needs, so and that type of pruning is allowed. We don't, and I think that's an important thing for us to not over-regulate those things and allow those routine maintenance. But the muddy area is when trees have been topped in the past for view corridors, which is often the case, right, with our ECAs, that we live on tops of steep slopes where there's a nice view of Mount Rainier or the Sound. And so that's where we need to be careful about not allowing to just re-top trees and continue that practice, because it's pretty detrimental to the health of the forest as well. So those are the situations where having a good arborist who knows the code and knows the industry standards is pretty helpful. So
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good weekend. Thanks for hopping on.
Okay, so let's see here. A note came in from Mary Steinmack to get a copy of the references we showed at the end of the presentation. So I just put a link in the chat. We are recording this session, so the presentation will be available to everyone, and there is a link in the chat to it. So you'll be able to have all of that information, I think, probably within the week. And let's see, Barry had another question. Let's go find Barry. I sent you a request to unmute. If you'd like to ask your question, that way.
Yeah. Hi.
Okay.
Yeah, and thanks, you guys. This is really helpful. Everybody's questions helpful as well. I have a situation now where there's a large hemlock, I think, that is that they're actually adding a second story, but the branches are right now down to the existing roof, and so they're going to have to cut off probably 10 feet of the branches. Is that regulated, or is that between the arborist and the owner? Or is that I mean, essentially, we're building within the drip line, but we're not disturbing the roots. We're kind of disturbing the 10 feet.
Canopy. Yeah,
probably have to cut 10 feet.
So yeah, we wouldn't regulate that. That would be something that I'd definitely work with your arborist on.
Mm-hmm.
And one caution I would say with Western hemlock,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if folks realize this, but it's actually our state tree. I like to remind people of that. Yeah, it's a pretty sensitive species, and I think more of an issue with as anyone who's lived here for a while, we're seeing these longer, drier summers, which is probably the largest impact. But definitely, work with your arborist, but be mindful that removal of too much canopy of something like a Western hemlock is definitely not recommended, just because they're already, they kind of fall in that category with our white pines and trees like that are just already pretty stressed. So, I'd say where there's room to reduce and keep some limbs, if there is. I'm not sure hemlock reacts particularly well to limb reduction, but might be worth, and that's where your arborist will guide you. But there's no, even with an exceptional tree, you're allowed to do that kind of, that falls under that routine maintenance. So
Okay. All right, great. Yeah,
thanks, Barry. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Appreciate the questions. We've still got,
thank you.
Still got about 50 minutes, so hopefully.
Okay.
Oh, really?
A couple.
I do have one more question if we got a little bit of time. another situation is, in fact, it's that same yard, and they want to keep all the trees,
Yeah.
but they have an expanding family, so they want this addition. So we're probably a halfway into the drip line, and a full foundation, a full, solid concrete stem wall foundation with footing. Of course, we're going to run into roots. Do we have, if we do a piling and beam for a single-story addition, we're going to be creating a hole that's probably 2 feet deep by 2 feet wide. How do we, do you think that, can you talk to that as an alternative for some of these additions? And how do we probe, what's the best way to probe that? Does right now the arborist goes out there and says, well, if you run into, we can recommend this, and that report goes to you. And if you run into a root that's more than 3 inches or whatever, then it becomes a problem. Can we pre-probe? Is there a way to check this out and get you that information?
Yeah. So there's a couple different tree companies in town now that use like air excavation techniques. So that's essentially compressed air through like a long wand-like tool.
Oh, yeah.
Basically you can excavate the soil and then do some exploratory digging without actually damaging the roots.
Oh.
Definitely using air and not water, though. Some of the Vector trucks use water.
Right.
That will actually just blast the outer layer of the roots off.
Right.
So
Okay.
but those techniques are great, like the pier and then like grade beam style techniques. And from what I've been told is if those techniques, if you plan on using those from the beginning, it can actually be a sort of comparable cost as a foundation. So that's where I'd say, the reviewing arborists that are looking at the projects in tandem with your arborist and those techniques, that's where allowing flexibility to a degree. The only one thing that we cannot allow flexibility on is that inner root area. So when you're starting to get up close to tree trunks, and then in those cases, I think it's creating a conflict between the building and the tree almost immediately too, anyway, if you're building that close. So that's something that I'd rather stay away from and try and guide people away from. So
Right. So how a third of the way is is prescriptive, but then there is something about halfway through the drip line.
So you take the radius of the drip line.
Yeah.
The inner half is like the no disturbance zone.
Yeah.
And then the outer half is you're allowed to disturb it up to a third. But the caveat is with a report from a professional, from a tree. It doesn't say arborist, it says tree professional.
Right. Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Great. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Barry. Good luck.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so I just wanted to let you know, I put a couple of links into our series on ECA, sort of tree and vegetation. So there's 331A, that's an overview, and then I also put in 331A that kind of goes more into just strictly vegetation restoration.
Awesome.
And we can go from there. We don't have any more questions in the chat, so if anybody wanted to raise their hands, there's a raise your hand feature right next to your name. You can kind of use if you'd like, or just get on and ask a question.
Yeah, I'd say just let's, if there's no questions in the chat, feel free to if folks can figure out how to raise their hands. Looks like Katie has a question again.
You guys have probably already mentioned this or had it in one of the slides, but is there a direct number to you to ask these additional questions?
We don't, we usually encourage folks to use that Q&A or the chat, but
Okay.
I will put
you
that in
can,
there now, the link to that for you, Katie.
but Katie, our emails are part of this presentation. And I encourage folks to normally send an email first, just with the situation, and hopefully a few photos, that's helpful, an address. And then we're more than happy to call you back if you want to chat over the phone. And I understand it. A chat over the phone sometimes is like the quickest way, but we definitely encourage folks to send us an email.
Okay, cool. And then last one, are you guys going to be sending this presentation for us to download so we can look
Yeah.
at these slides later? Cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there's going to be a link at the end of the presentation, I believe, or Heather might be able to add it sooner, but there'll be a link, and I think within a couple of weeks, Moon will have this uploaded. I think there's still the one from last year currently, which is the exact same presentation, but yeah, so.
Okay, I just put a link in. So there's a link in the chat, and this is where you'll be able to find the presentation once Moon has uploaded everything to the website. So you guys will have access to that. And I am now going to look for getting a link to the Q&A so you can get to us that way as well. Okay.
Thanks, Heather. Doing an awesome job on the chat.
Problem.
Definitely welcome questions. It's going to be a long 40 odd minutes.
Can you unmute all, Paul?
I don't know if I can or not. I mean,
Okay.
at this stage, if we
Yeah.
don't have specific questions, I welcome a dialogue too. We
Yeah.
talk
I think
about your frustrations.
I can unmute all. Are you comfortable with me doing that?
I don't know. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
folks want to chat.
Okay.
I'm fine with it.
Okay. I think I just Yep.
Do you know of, this is Barry again.
Yeah.
Do you know of a good app for defining trees from the bark? Because in the winter we don't have leaves. Is there any app out there that works? Because oftentimes the trees aren't even, and this is something I'd like to ask about. We're putting in a site plan, and they would like the Latin names of every tree on the block, but the fact is that's costing everybody a lot of money and turning environmentalists against you. I'd like to know that, if we're working in the backyard, do we really have to give the Latin names for every tree on the property? Or, it seems like everything's going a little bit overboard. Sometimes the trees have nothing to do, there's no drip line in the way.
Right.
But we have to spend an inordinate amount of time, defining trees.
Yeah, so there's a couple of those photo identifier apps, but I'm not personally familiar with how good they are.
Right.
I did sort of try one out a few years ago when I worked over at SDOT, and it wasn't very effective. That was more of a leaf one. So
Right.
I can't personally talk to that. And what I would say is that generally speaking, we're only going to be looking at the trees that are affected by the development that overhang the area of disturbance. So, it is important to get them identified with a minimum, the common name, because the director's rule is complex and we've often trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But and that's of course going to be an arborist that's going to need to identify it. So, but
exactly, yeah. So what I'm trying to do is save the, right now the arborists are like $1,200 for coming out to a property, So, and when it doesn't have anything to do with the project, and of course it's difficult for us to define the trees, but we can put the drip lines on there based on the maps that we have even from the city.
Well, we
Can
can,
we tell the people at the front office that are taking in the site plan that this may not be necessary if it's not in conjunction with, any issue? Because they're the
yeah,
ones who
I
come in
mean,
and see the site plan. They say, "Oh, you need all the Latin names," and I'm like, "Okay, we're doing all interior work here. We don't need, you know."
then I would say, especially in that situation where it's a
Yeah,
remodel and you're not proposing ground disturbance,
yeah,
then I think it would be acceptable. And I think to just have the common names or, because technically, and that's where, there's this fine balance of regulation and over-regulation.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I hear you loud and clear.
yeah,
So, so yeah, I mean, I don't have a very clear answer for it, but I would say the
yeah,
trees immediately that are affected, it's important to ID them. But
yeah,
then, we're here to help too. So you could
yeah,
take a few photos and send me an email, and I'm pretty good at IDing trees using Google Street View and
yeah,
photos.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, it's
so
before it gets to you. I think these are, and I think I was over exaggerating. Interior work does not trigger that, but oftentimes something in the backyard, and we don't even have trees in the backyard, but they want the Latin names for the trees in the front yard is kind of a front desk. The first initial site plan
yeah,
is put in, and it's rejected because of this. And then I'm like, I don't have the time to deal with this, so I have to tell the owners to get an arborist, and then they're like, what, and it just turns people against the whole, it just sours the whole thing when it is a bit of an overregulation at that point. But it's hard to, you can't, I live around the block from SDCI. I used to just be able to go up and communicate with people. At this
yeah,
point, it's a way of weeding out projects that just say, oh, go back and get the Latin names. And it's a no response email, so we don't have any way of communicating. The
yeah,
city has
yeah.
completely shut itself off from communication. So,
Is
it's
that
like
for?
if you could communicate with the front desk to say, hey, we don't necessarily need this, so we could
So
calm them down a little bit because I think they have a different idea of what's
I
going on.
would I would encourage you to use the chatbot feature on the questions,
Yeah.
send us a question page, because you should be able to get to a live person now, especially for that kind of, if you have an active project like that, the chatbot will prompt you to put in the project
Uh,
number, and you should get routed to the team that's working on that. It's just
yeah,
it's just it's an intake requirement, so it's like a
right,
screening requirement. So,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
Sometimes the preliminary application screeners aren't sort of seeing the project
yeah,
holistically, like it is. So
yeah.
yeah.
it's
Heather's
definitely
an
worthwhile.
expert.
I put the link to it's this sort of new chat um, link
Oh, you did.
where you can get to us live. It's yeah, and I think it'll be very useful for you, Barry.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
It's a pretty
I know
it's pretty
Heather,
amazing.
we've spent some time on FAR
Yeah, we have.
regulations and everything
We
else
have.
over time.
So definitely check it out and
Yeah,
definitely welcome your feedback on it. But I think it's going to be a good ad for, definitely questions like you have right now.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I appreciate that.
yeah,
We do have a question from FMD who has their hand raised. Maybe
Yeah, back to the laurels. Paul, you referred to them as a invasive species. And we have a situation where it's a ECA and a steep slope, but the laurels do help holding the slope down, give it some stability. So if you encourage removing it, what other species that's shrub-like and can provide cover between properties would you recommend if we're digging out some of the laurels?
well, if you're going to be doing revegetation in those areas, the code actually requires natives, and so there's I think through those tips, Heather, right? Is there some recommended species? Basically,
I think we're mainly sending people to King County Native Plants, and I can go ahead and put a link in the
yeah,
chat for you there. And then Sound Native Plants has some really great plant lists as well that you
yeah,
can find some things like specific to the orientation of your site and and the height and this kind of stuff that you're shooting for. And if you have questions after looking through those, we can definitely talk about that.
Yeah, I would say
Okay, I'll do
one,
that now.
You referenced the Great Plant Picks, which I find a great resource as well.
yeah,
So
it's a great site. Yeah.
any recommendations they make you approve of in terms of plant picks for native plants?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
you'll definitely see crossover on the King County Native Plant site, and then also at Sound Native Plants for sure.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, one shrub that comes to mind would be like the native hazelnuts, something like that. They do a good job.
And they do a good job of sort of anchoring the soil as well, the root structure as such.
Yeah, yeah,
And one good thing to note is that when vegetation is done in steep slopes, we are really recommending to use smaller container sizes. So, 1 gallon shrubs, and trees, our minimum is usually 2 gallon shrubs. So and we have a calculator as well to determine the area and the amount of shrubs and trees that you would need. So I'll put
yeah.
all of those in the chat for you.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for all these links. These are great. If there's nobody else, there's somebody asking
Wait.
a question.
I have a question. This is FMD.
Hi,
Okay.
FMD.
Hi. So I apologize. I got on here late because I was having trouble getting hooked up and stuff. But
Oh, no problem.
I missed the whole presentation, but I will go back and take a look at it once it's posted and stuff. But so was
Yeah.
the conversation in this session primarily due to trees and construction, sort of? Because I have a question about trees that the city plants on parking strips.
Oh, yeah. So generally speaking, this session is for private property, but I used to work for SDOT. I worked for SDOT for 5 years, so I'm happy to answer questions about right-of-way trees. One thing I just want to let you know is tomorrow we're running the exact same presentation from 10 to noon. So,
Oh, okay.
if tomorrow you can spare the time and you'd like to see my colleague Deb she might do a better job at the presentation. I don't know. You could hop on then, but it will be available as the recording will be available on our website.
Yeah, I'll check that out. But so just real quick, if I can, maybe you can just, my question is in regards, like I said, the trees planted by the city and the parking strips that are becoming a issue with sewer lines.
Yeah. So
So who should I talk to about that? Or if you can maybe.
so that would be you'd want to talk to the SDOT arborist office, and we have a link to their website at the end that we're going to share, and Heather might share it in the chat now.
Okay.
The 684 tree number is their main number. You could leave a message there.
Okay.
So it's a sort of that's a pretty can be a frustrating situation depending.
Yeah.
So right away trees, you may know this. Sometimes they're considered privately maintained, and sometimes they're considered maintained by the city. So depending on, and you can look that up through the tree inventory and figure that one out. So as property owners in Seattle, we can be responsible for the sewer line issue depending on who planted the tree.
Yeah, the city planted these trees.
Okay, and okay, so
Frankly, I'd like to get them the hell out.
yeah,
I mean, they're wrecking the sidewalk.
yeah.
And
So,
I had my sewer scoped here not too long ago, and it's not a problem quite yet, but they said it's an issue that should be addressed.
yeah, and
So I want to.
no, so normally SDOT they're only going to allow removal of a tree if it's like right on the sewer line and they need to dig up the tree to get to the sewer. But yeah, I would encourage reaching out to them with the specifics of your situation because it's
And how broken sidewalk when when the roots are coming up and wrecking the sidewalk.
with a sidewalk issue. There's you can get an app on your phone called the Find It Fix It app. I believe that's still going. I haven't worked with Estop for a few years, but that's a good way to report those through.
Okay.
It's like a free app through the App Store, Find It Fix It, and you can report those sidewalk issues. So I definitely encourage you to do that, especially, there's some liability there for
Exactly.
tripping on those. So
Yeah.
yeah, and the arborist office will be able to help you with all of those issues. So
Okay.
I did put something in the chat for you. There's a phone number and also an email.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm not seeing, why do I not see those chat stuff that's in the chat?
On the lower right-hand corner of your WebEx,
Uh-huh.
there should be there's like 3 dots in the lower right-hand corner, panel options,
Uh-huh.
and you should be able to see in there chat and participants. You can open a window where you'll see the chat.
Let's see, question and answers, captions and highlights and notes.
Was there anything just to the left of those 3 dots that says chat?
Chat. Oop, that's it. Chat. Yeah, when I hit the chat button, it shows where it's addressed to everyone and I can enter a chat.
Can you
yeah,
can you see a panel window of information?
No.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
you should be able to grab onto it and drag open the chat, make
Yeah,
it bigger.
it should show up on the if you go to layout on the very top of on the top right hand side, it says layout. Do you see that?
Oh, right there, layout.
And maybe if you stack side by side or stack it so maybe it shows in a different way, maybe the chat will show up for you.
Now all that did was move the participants to the side rather than on top of the chat. So if I gave you an email, could you?
Yeah, if you put the email in the chat, if you put the email in that box, I can go ahead and email you all this information. That's not a problem.
Okay.
As long as you don't mind everyone else seeing your email.
If you don't mind everybody else seeing your email address.
I trust that people are honest.
Yes.
I mean, we're all here for help and assistance and knowledge, so hopefully nobody's a troll.
So you're interested in the SDOT information. Do you want me to just maybe email you everything that's in the chat? Would that be helpful?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. So did you just get my email?
Yep, I did.
Oh, yeah, see, I don't see it. I should be able to see that in the chat.
Yeah, no, you should. Everybody is, but I'll send it to you. That's no problem.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, after the meeting's over. What is your first name? I'm sorry.
It's Fio, F-I-O.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Theo. It looks like Mary has a hand up. Mary.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm not used to using computers, so bear with me, please.
No
Can you
problem.
hear me still?
Yeah, there's a little echo, but I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question. My neighbors have a tree growing into our power lines and was wondering how we address this. Is that through the city or through the neighbors or both?
That would be something that I would chat with your neighbor about. That would be what's known as a civil matter between you and them. If it's just the power line that goes to your house, normally there should just be like a few feet of clearance on that line, but it's not usually a huge issue. But yeah, I would talk to the neighbor, and then you'd likely have to just hire an arborist yourself to prune that if it's hanging over your property. But definitely chat to the neighbor. But yeah, that's what's known as a civil matter. The city wouldn't be involved in that.
And also, if their tree roots are growing into our sewer line, how do you handle that?
That would be the same kind of thing. If you're going to fix the sewer, you prune those back, talk to the neighbor about that situation. It's going to be a very site-specific situation. The problem with trees and sewers I live in a 1924 house, for instance, that I moved in and discovered the sewer was concrete pipes that weren't actually joined together. So it can often be a sewer issue and not necessarily a course, it's an issue with the roots growing in there, but it's an issue of like fixing the sewer. So, but it's definitely, it just depends on the tree, whether it's regulated or not. But I would chat to the neighbor if it's a neighbor's tree, but
Okay, thank you.
yeah, can be kind of a tough situation.
Got another general question if nobody's asking anything.
Yeah.
And it's probably more toward Heather. At the beginning of the year, we had gotten a notice that the city was going to be dealing with permits through like a PDF editing system. And then I haven't heard anything more about that. Is there a place I might be able to, do you know anything about that? And if it's something we have to request or if it's going to be implemented at some point? So as opposed to just sending it to the portal, it would be kind of a, I didn't get if it was live or I'm not sure.
Is this related to Bluebeam and how you guys are submitting on Bluebeam now and the whole
Yes,
review
it's the
process? Is that
Bluebeam,
what it
yes.
is?
I haven't heard anything since, and I don't know where to
we're
go to.
active. Yeah.
How do
So
I do that?
Bluebeam is now how we're all doing our reviews.
Okay,
And I am sure on our website, and I can do a little perusing about instructions related to that. But there is
So-
definitely a process that
Okay.
we are all learning sort of in tandem with
Okay.
learning this new Zendesk sort of bot chat.
yeah,
So we've got a lot on our plate trying to sort of keep everything moving and,
yeah.
providing customer service for you guys. So,
Right.
but I'll look to see and talk to Moon and see if anything has been put out about Bluebeam for you.
Okay,
That
yeah,
might
I
be
saw
helpful.
something about it, and then I don't know what happened to it, and I don't know where to, I don't know
Okay.
where that resides, but I
Okay,
guess,
I'll put that
yeah, I'm
on my
interested.
I'll put that on my list.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Do you want me to email you that or what would you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, I think you
wonder
have
if I have your
my
email.
email. Yeah,
I think I probably do.
it's
So,
First Line Design. Yeah.
okay, I can
So-
send it your way.
Yeah, if you find it, or I'll search for it, but I don't even know where to. I don't. So you say it's being implemented, but
Well, it's implemented. We are utilizing
implemented.
Bluebeam
Oh.
currently. Yes.
Okay. I'll maybe we could do this offline, but I appreciate
Okay.
it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Mary.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's that new system is going to make things a lot easier in the long run.
Hopefully, yeah.
Anyone have questions, comments for Heather or I? We got to everything in the chat, right, Heather? Yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten to everything in the chat. Oh, one last final thing
Thanks, Sergio.
that I'd like to ask you guys. They are asking us to put a survey link in here. You can choose to do that if you'd like, and I'll go ahead and pop that in there.
Thanks, Heather.
Yep, no worries. Let me just find it.
You're welcome, Sergio.
Okay, here it
Welcome,
is.
Robin.
I think it just takes a couple of minutes. So we can improve
There it
this in the coming years.
Thanks, Catherine. Appreciate it. Oh, maybe next year we could do an in-person event.
Right.
Almost rather do that. Looks like we have a few people left still, so definitely feel free to jump in, folks. Don't be shy.
This question is, the next session that starts at 1 o'clock, is it going to be the same WebEx? Should I just stay on? Or
It's going to be a different meeting. Each each meeting has its unique link, I believe.
Okay,
So yeah, this one just runs till we run till noon. So we're
yeah,
gonna stay on and make sure we don't get any late stragglers who need questions answered.
like me. Okay,
That's fine.
I think I'm out of here. So thank you so
All
much.
right. Well, good luck with your situation. I hope SDOT can help you out.
Yes, yes. I
Okay.
just needed to be pointed in the right direction. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. Bye.
Yeah. You're welcome. Take care.
Just a question for some that had to join late and didn't catch all of the presentation. Is there a link to the presentation that you'll send out to the maybe the registered people?
Yeah. You'll get. I'm pretty sure Moon will email it out and
It is actually in the chat. There is a link for
chat.
you. And I can put it at the very bottom so you can see it again
That'd be
if you
great.
like. Okay,
I appreciate
no
that.
problem. I'll take care of that for you.
Thanks very much.
Is there any part of the presentation that anyone wants slight further clarification on? Any just general tree questions? ECA questions?
I guess I have a question. For power lines where trees branches are intertwined, what is the distance needed to cut away from the line, whether it's the city cutting it or it's it's like Comcast or CenturyLink that are taking care of their lines?
So, generally speaking, City Light are going to maintain 10 feet clearance from those primary power lines, the ones that are at top of the pole. But then the secondary service, which is the one that comes into your house, is going to be just keeping the branches from touching those. Otherwise, like cable and phone, I don't think there are clearance requirements on those. But definitely encourage you to talk to an arborist on that. I mean, essentially all those lines are considered energized conductors. So from a safety perspective, it's best to have clearance from them, but there's different industry standards depending on the voltage that goes through those. But generally speaking, City Light is only going to maintain the primary power line and distances from those, and then private homeowners would be responsible for maintaining the wires that come onto their property. So.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Heather, do you think we should just keep going till noon, or do you want to?
Let's see here. How many?
think?
I've got 10 others on the line still. So yeah, unless there are questions, I can double check with Heather and Daniel. Give me a moment.
Yeah, just check.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'll
it's
ask.
only 15 minutes. I'm happy to sit and
Yeah,
make sure we don't
somebody
get someone coming on at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
On it.
it looks like the sun's gone away now.
Oh yeah.
I was kind of hoping to get out in it.
Rain on us tomorrow, so good to get out this afternoon.
Hopefully, get a bit of snow in the mountains, right? I think that's the word.
Yeah, that's the hope.
I was trying to think if there's anything I could go over, but we've sort of covered it mostly, I think. Is anyone going to any of the other home fair sessions that are happening this weekend?
I just put in a question to Daniel, Paul, so you know, and then I sent Theo that information, and I think I just needed to send Barry something as well.
Okay,
So I'll have a look and try and do that right now.
thanks. Need some music to play or something.
Yeah, or have your dog entertain us.
Yeah, I kept him out of the room because I was afraid he was going to do something inappropriate while I was on the camera.
Oh, it should probably, if this is ending, we need to stop the recording.
Yeah, I can do that.